3.8 GPA, 517 MCAT, 600 hours working as a health coach, 140 hours working with the underserved, 2 posters, 1 publication, and 0 medical school acceptances. Same 3.8 GPA, same 517 MCAT, but multiple acceptances, now at the competitive California medical school, UC Irvine. What was the difference? Was it his extracurricular activities? Nope. His letters of recommendations? No. It wasn't his personality nor his interview skills neither. I can prove that because these 2 applications with vastly different results are from the exact same person, my roommate, Ben. Ben went from having 0 acceptances to getting into UC Irvine Medical School. Here are the 6 mistakes he made on his application the first time and how he corrected it for that next cycle. While number 2 is my favorite lesson, number 4 is the one most pre-meds make mistakes on. Number 1, making cliché statements with no evidence. So here I have 2 examples from the first application that didn't earn any acceptances and 2 of the same extracurricular activity that this pre-med rewrote in that next cycle so you could see exactly what the difference is. Most pre-meds believe that cliché statements are an issue. I actually don't think they're a problem. The problem is that oftentimes cliché statements are written without any backup evidence. I think it'd be very hard to write a personal statement or a medical school application that didn't have some version of I like science and I want to help people. Both of those are cliche things and they themselves are not the problem. The problem is that there's no supporting backup evidence or stories to support that claim. So you'll see here with my roommate Ben's first application, he has a ton of cliches with no evidence and how he transitions that into his next application where he says those same cliches, but this time with supporting evidence. Let's take a look. So this is his student stroke team experience. It's a highly coveted extracurricular activity that's extremely competitive at UCLA. Let's see how he describes it, however. I want to bring your attention to how generic or abstract some of these phrases are. Taking notes on patient conditions such as stroke scale score, symptoms, blood glucose levels, and last known wellness and symptom onset for eligibility in ongoing clinical trials and assisting in enrollment. Again, kind of hazy as to what it is exactly that he does. And here's where that cliche comes in. As I watched physicians implement the latest medical advances to improve patient outcomes, I gained a greater appreciation for research in medicine. This is a common cliche that a ton of pre-meds harp on, this appreciation for the role of research in medicine. With that being said, he shares how he wrote down some sugar levels and shadowed some neurologists as they looked at the symptoms. So it wasn't really clear in my head that there was any backup evidence to support his claim that he understands how important research is in medicine. That is a prime example of making this broad sweeping statement, this broad cliche, without having any supporting evidence to back it up. And here, during the next year, he decides to really double down on this extracurricular activity and choose it as a most meaningful. And that offers him more room to give stories, to give evidence that what he says, he truly understands. And so you can see here, he writes, I gained a greater appreciation for the relationship between healthcare and research. Again, that same cliche. And he talks about a patient who came in with a Broca's aphasia and was given a medication tested in our clinical trial. So you see really the true relationship between a patient, a person that he saw come into the emergency department, and a real medication that his team tested during their clinical trials. That gives you a real story, a real example to hang your hat on. Soon, he was speaking normally and sustained minimal injury to his brain. Research ultimately improves patient outcomes, and I hope to integrate research into how I practice medicine. So again, the story here is what makes this cliche work. He doesn't change anything about the cliche, just the surrounding information. And here you'll see in the second paragraph, he tells a ton more stories about the young woman who was rushed in after weakness in the left hand with moya disease, or the young man who woke up with right-sided weakness with a history of Serge Weber, or the senior citizen who dropped his morning coffee, or the grandparent who suddenly fell unconscious on the way to the airport. This is 4 or 5 different stories of real people with real details and real descriptions that demonstrate again that he understands the impact that a stroke can have on patients and their families and how they typically come in. When he now says this cliche of, I appreciated how neurologists considered each patient's individual circumstances and constructed personalized treatment plans for each patient, something that many pre-meds say, you can now really understand it because he gave 3 or 4 different examples of patients who had come in with different backgrounds and got different treatment options. Next, we have another example here of a shadowing description. And you can see again how generic and abstract this is. He shares that he shadows neurosurgeon Dr. Yashar in clinic. He says that these experiences further spurred my interest in neuroscience and neurology. Again, with no real evidence or stories in the middle of the writing to support that conclusion. Now I want you to compare it to this experience here that next year where he starts incorporating more stories into his writing. As Dr. Blank inquired about his bucket list, the patient became emotional. Dr. Blank earnestly listened to the patient express his fears of dying. This was a powerful indicator of the level of trust involved in the physician-patient relationship. When confronted with the imminent death of their patients, physicians must be prepared to care for their patients emotionally, even when nothing else can be done medically. So now we have the story of the patient with terminal spine cancer. And now when he says something that's cliche, like I hope to cultivate trusting relationships, you can understand exactly where he gets that from. He gets that from seeing that interaction with this patient with terminal spine cancer and the neurosurgeon honestly saying, I have nothing left to offer you medically, but I can be here for you emotionally. Number 2, if stories are king, then data is queen. Make sure you're sharing real numbers to demonstrate real impact. So here, again, I'll show you examples of the exact same extracurricular activities that Ben wrote without data and just how much stronger they sound with real data. Up top here, you'll see his posters and publications, and then down here, you'll see his description of his presentation of his work with My Life. You'll see here that it's pretty black and white, pretty straightforward. Nothing much here other than I co-authored a publication with My Life. This is its title. I also co-authored this publication, Sibling Risk of Infantile Spasms. This is his title. This is my mentor. This is kind of where we're at. You'll see here that the publications were presented at 2 different conferences, this one and this one. And there's really not much else to write home about from both of these experiences. They're very straightforward. It just says, this is what happened. But now I want you to see the same work and activities section about the same presentation and how he added more data to add more life to this writing here. So he says that I coached patients, gathered data, and created poster presentations. Again, that they were presented at these 2 conferences, that one and that one. Results show that our patients lost 4.6% of their body weight. That's pretty substantial. 100-pound person losing 5 pounds, 200-pound person losing 10 pounds, and increased exercise by 60 minutes per week. Most of these people starting at 0, and so ending up at 60 minutes per week is super substantial. Patients adopted healthier lifestyles with the help of our program, and he talks about digital technologies. Just the simple addition of reporting 4.6% of their body weight, 60 minutes more per week, that makes this experience a little bit more tangible. It feels like you can really understand this experience a little bit more now that you know exactly their results. If you had the characters like he did, he decided to use those characters to really show the impact that he was having. And now here, this is another example of where he expands on his epilepsy project just to share again more about that piece that the writer would not have known in his original description here. Really just one sentence with the title and the mentor. That's about it. Here, he writes that my results showed no increased risk to siblings. I conducted a retrospective cohort study to determine the risk of these disorders among siblings of children with infantile spasms. My results showed no increased risk. As a result, we believe comorbid autism may not be due to shared genetic susceptibility, but maybe rather to the mechanisms of the spasms themselves. The data provides guidance to parents of patients who want to grow their families. He doesn't show an exact number, but he shares the data non-significant relationship between siblings with infantile spasms. So while he doesn't show a specific number, he does show that the risk of disorders among siblings of children with infantile spasms are essentially 0. There's no increased risk if you are a sibling of someone who already has infantile spasms. So you can imagine how that would help a parent who maybe had a child with infantile spasms. And the question is, I just had one child with this condition. If I have another child, what is the risk that they will have this condition as well? So it's a very helpful answer to provide and help these families with family planning. Again, you can see how data enriches this work and activities description. So you really get a sense of what exactly the work was about and the impact that he had in that project. Mistake number 3, details matter. You'll see a ton of missed periods, run-on sentences, extra spaces, and really none of that looks professional on your final written application. Here are examples. All right, here we'll start with an example of our calculation not even being correct. So you'll see that he spent 80 hours with Dr. Yashar and 20 hours with the stroke team neurologist, but he adds it up as 110 hours. Again, not a big deal. Not a ton of people are going to nitpick and notice that. But for the schools that do, it becomes massive, right? Put yourself in the shoes of the admissions committee member, someone who has to read hundreds, if not thousands of applications. If they notice some of these blips that are just inconsistent, they might be annoyed or confused. And both of those feelings are not good when it comes to deciding whether or not you get a secondary or an interview or an acceptance to their school. Next, we're going to take a look at an example of missing periods. So you can see here at the end of this paragraph, there is no period here. And again, how many people are going to notice this? I'm not sure, but the people who do notice this are going to feel and find that it's quite unprofessional. And here we have another example of odd spacing between periods that isn't consistent with the other sentences. So again, it just shows a lack of proofreading here. And lastly, we have run-on sentences. These are ones that are just tough to really understand. If your reader needs to read a sentence 2, 3, 4 times to really understand what you said, that's not going to help your candidacy. So I'll read this out loud just so you can get a sense of what it would feel like to read this on your desk as an admissions committee member. I volunteered in the UCLA Medical Center Emergency Department, taking notes on patient conditions such as stroke scale score, symptoms, blood glucose levels, and last known wellness and symptom onset for eligibility in ongoing clinical trials and assisting in enrollment. Kind of a huge sentence there, right? So again, these sentences can be broken up into more simple sentences. You can break down and question whether you need to really share that you are measuring blood glucose levels, like what is really relevant for this person to know. And we can clean up the writing in that way, just so it doesn't feel so sloppy. Number 4, real estate matters. If you're not doubling down on something you said earlier or sharing a new perspective on something, then it doesn't really make sense to repeat it in a different part of your application. Being repetitive will not help. It will hurt because you take away the opportunity to share something else about your application, or you just confuse or frustrate the reader because they've already seen this. All right, so here we look at the work and activities section, and this is the first time a story about my life was shared. He writes that he was Michelle's health coach, tasked with helping her eat healthier and exercise more frequently. She was a mother of 2, had her own bakery business, worked late into the night, couldn't afford gym memberships, and didn't have enough time or resources to dedicate to her health. He found alternative exercise from simply walking up the stairs and changing her diet from a high-fat ketogenic diet to something that could accommodate that, but that was more low carb, like broccoli, salmon, and walnuts. At the end of the program, she loses 12 pounds, and people have unique circumstances that may prevent them from maintaining their health. I think it's a fantastic story about how to cater your care to the specific patient situation. With that being said, this is not the only time he tells a story something like this. In his personal statement, just a couple of pages later, he shares about Robert's struggle with losing weight, managing his diet, increasing his weekly active minutes while motivating him to maintain progress. Robert preferred a low-carb diet, so he suggested high vegetables, beets, Brussels sprouts. When Robert strained his back, we discussed alternative exercise to rehabilitate lower back injuries. He loses 24 pounds, the most in the program. And he writes that I was able to help Robert with encouraging words and a listening ear. I realized humility is a large part of helping those in need, even through simple, compassionate gestures. So the conclusion is a slightly different, but really the story is exactly the same. We have this patient who needs accommodations based on their diet, based on an injury. And that's essentially the exact same thing that he shares with his earlier patient, Michelle. And so the Michelle and Robert stories don't really add a new perspective on Ben and his story and his desire to get into medical school. So this is a big mistake a lot of premeds make because they feel like they have to fill up so much space. They have to fill up all 15 work and activity sections. They have to fill everything to the brim. But what you get often, if you truly do not have enough content to fill those spaces, that's okay. The compulsion, however, is to repeat things. And you can see how these two stories are pretty much identical. And reading both of them back to back can be repetitive, confusing, annoying, things that you would not want on to describe how you want your admissions committee member to feel when reading your application. So real estate matters. Make sure that you are not repeating yourself in different parts of the application. And if you are, to really share a different story with a different purpose and a truly different conclusion. Number 5, being afraid to show who you are. So many pre-meds feel like everything they share has to be 100% relevant to medical school admissions. And if they are going to share a hobby, they have to connect how it will make them a better doctor. That is not true. We want to learn who you are outside of the clinic, outside of the hospital. Just because when your work ends as being a doctor at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., we're all going to go to a restaurant and enjoy each other's company. And so learning a little bit more about you now, learning about what you care about outside of work will give a more three-dimensional view of who you are as a person. And so do not shy away from those descriptions as Ben did in his first application, but really he resolved in that second application. All right, so here you see how Ben describes his interest of photography. Photography allows me to further my creative bounds. I enjoy learning a craft, attending to detail, exploring my surroundings. He loves taking shots of his friends and family, Los Angeles, the flowers in my backyard. He also creates educational videos on YouTube to teach other people photography. So now you're learning a little bit more about Ben, what he cares about, what he does on his free time, and that just helps add context to everything else that he's involved with. So I love this entry. It's a very short, simple entry about what he likes taking pictures of, what he does, creating YouTube videos to teach other people photography, and how he has learned his craft. And again, it does not have to connect back to medicine and being a better doctor, but sometimes it does. He writes in his infantile spasms research experience in his most meaningful paragraph, as an amateur photographer, I am challenged with capturing new perspectives of my subject with various angles and emotions. Research is similar to photography in this way. Similarly, medical research challenges current healthcare practices with new information to further our understanding and improve standard of care. So he builds this connection between being a photographer and capturing other new perspectives and medical research that challenges current healthcare and tries to figure out new information to look at a problem clinically from a different lens, different angle, different perspective in the research lab. Again, this is a small blip, just one sentence connecting it to photography. It doesn't have to, but if it does and it makes sense, certainly go ahead and do so. That again, makes sure that we connect who you are outside of work with who you are inside of work. Mistake number 6, submitting your application late. When you submit your application late, it gets verified late. And if it gets verified late, admissions committees see it late. And if they see it late, they have already given interviews, given acceptances to other premeds. And now you're battling for fewer seats. So this is the entire concept of rolling admissions. But I actually want to make the counterpoint today. I want you to notice between 2020 and 2019 when he submits it. In 2020, he submits it in late June 20th here. And actually it opened around late May. So kind of that May 31st, May 24th, kind of that type of time frame. So he submitted about a month late. And remember, this is the application in 2020 that did really well. Contrast that with this 2019 application where he submits it early on May 31st. That's probably on the first day or the first week. He submits it early, yet in this cycle, he earns 0 acceptances. So I want to make the point that rolling admissions is important, but it is not worth submitting early if you sacrifice quality. If you make all these other mistakes and you don't tell stories, you don't share data, you have sloppy hours, missing periods, run-on sentences, you repeat things on your application that do not take full advantage of your real estate, you do not share who you are in the application, then submitting early doesn't matter. You can see that he got away with submitting almost an entire month late because he was working on perfecting each of these other aspects of his application. So while it is important, again, I want to make sure that we all are on the same page. It is not as important as balancing quality. Of course, you can't submit it 5 months late with a perfect application because you're really battling for like 5 seats at that point. But you want to balance speed of submission with a high quality application. And those are the 6 mistakes my roommate Ben corrected to go from 0 medical school acceptances to multiple medical school acceptances, including his dream school, UC Irvine Medical School, a very, very competitive program in California. And now you'll want to see an application that did everything right and exactly how he earned acceptances to UCSF and eventually a full ride scholarship to UCLA Medical School. That video is here, and I will see you over there.